My name is Lena Ashford, and the day I finally told the truth, I was walking along the edge of a highway with my toddler pressed against my chest, gravel biting into my shoes and fear burning through my lungs. I was 27 years old, educated, capable, and yet there I was counting my steps so I wouldn't collapse before the next mile marker. Cars tore past us like we were invisible. The wind from passing trucks shook my bones. My son, Evan, was too young to understand why his mother was shaking or why his head was tucked under my chin like I was trying to hide him from the world. I kept walking because stopping felt more dangerous than moving forward. Then I heard tires scream. A dark SUV cut across traffic and stopped inches from me. The driver's door flew open and my father stepped out, his face pale, eyes sharp with something between panic and fury. "Lena!" he shouted over the road noise. "Where is your car?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and said the words I'd been swallowing for months. "Mark took my keys. He said I'm not well enough to drive." Inside my father's car, the silence felt heavier than the traffic we'd escaped. The air was cold, blasting my skin, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Evan fell asleep almost instantly, his small body rising and falling like nothing in the world was wrong. I stared at him and felt the shame crawl up my throat. My father didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the road, jaw locked, hands tight on the steering wheel. "How long?" he asked. Not like a dad, like a man trained to collect facts. "6 months," I whispered. Since Evan was about a year and a half, his breath hitched. "Why didn't you say anything?" I shook my head. "Because it didn't look like abuse. It didn't start with shouting or bruises. It started with help." I told him how Marilyn, my mother-in-law, began showing up with meals, insisting I rest. How Mark offered to handle the finances because he was better with numbers. How grateful I was, how tired. How slowly my choices disappeared. I told him how concern became control, how kindness became supervision, how every protest was labeled anxiety, instability, overreaction. I wasn't trapped all at once. I was lowered into it gently. I explained it the only way I knew how. "It's like that story about the frog," I said quietly. "If you throw it into boiling water, it jumps out. But if the water heats slowly, it doesn't realize it's dying." First, Marilyn moved into the guest room. Then she critiqued how I fed Evan. Then she checked receipts, corrected my spending, questioned my parenting. Mark backed her every time. When I asked why my savings account was moved, he said I was paranoid. When I asked why my phone needed monitoring, he said he was protecting my mental health. When my car keys vanished, he said it was for my safety. "You've been scattered lately," he told me. "I'm just looking out for you." They read my messages, tracked my location, decided who I could call. I stopped calling my father because I didn't want them to know I was breaking. I thought if I was calmer, quieter, more grateful, I'd earn my life back. My father pulled the car over and turned to me. The anger wasn't for me. It was colder than that, sharper. "That isn't help," he said. "That's a siege. They isolated you, disarmed you. And now they're holding you." We went back, not to talk, not to negotiate, to leave. The house looked perfect from the outside: stone, trimmed hedges, expensive silence. Mark and Marilyn were on the patio, laughing, wine glasses catching the light. They looked untouched by what they'd done. When my father asked for my keys, Mark smiled like it was a misunderstanding. "She's not stable right now," he said easily. "We're doing what's best." I stepped forward, heart pounding. "I'm leaving." Marilyn laughed. "With what? You don't have a job. You don't have a car. You don't even know what's real anymore." My father stood between us, calm, deadly. "Give her the keys." Mark refused. Said it was his house, his rules. Sighed I could leave, but not with my child. The air changed. My father spoke about laws, about restraint, about consequences. Then he turned to me. "Go inside, get your documents. Get Evan's things." I ran through that house like it was already burning, realizing for the first time it wasn't my home. It was a crime scene. And this moment was only the beginning. I didn't pack like someone leaving for a weekend. I packed like someone escaping a flood with seconds to spare. Drawers were yanked open, clothes shoved into a duffel without folding, without care. Evan's tiny shirts, socks that didn't match, his favorite blanket balled up and pressed to my chest for one stolen breath. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, but my mind catalogued everything with brutal clarity, the way the walls felt colder, the way the bed no longer felt like mine, the way the house watched me. I heard voices downstairs, sharp and rising, but they sounded far away, like noise through water. My father stood in the doorway, his body blocking the hall, his eyes scanning for movement. He looked like a sentry at the edge of a war zone. I paused when I found the folder under the mattress, the one thing I'd protected more fiercely than my own sleep. I pulled it out, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Dad?" I whispered. He didn't turn. "I know," he said quietly. "I saw it months ago, the way you stopped laughing. The way you checked Mark's face before answering simple questions." His voice cracked. I told myself it wasn't my place. The words landed heavy between us. "I didn't stay because I was weak," I said. "I stayed because if I left wrong, they would take Evan." I opened the folder. Photos, screenshots, statements, proof. "I wasn't surviving," I said. "I was waiting." We went downstairs together. Mark was at the bottom of the steps, his face tight with disbelief. Marilyn hovered behind him, phone in hand, thumb trembling. "You can't take him," she shrieked, pointing at Evan. "That's kidnapping." My father didn't slow. His voice was steady, precise. "A mother leaving with her child is not a crime. Preventing her from doing so is—" He spoke like someone who knew every word carried weight. Marilyn's phone lowered. Her confidence cracked. I didn't look at the kitchen where I'd cried over burned toast or the living room where my voice had learned to shrink. I walked past them and out the front door into sunlight so bright it hurt. The air tasted different, sharp, clean, alive. In the car, Evan babbled at passing trees like nothing monumental had just happened. I stared straight ahead, waiting for relief. It didn't come. What came instead was clarity, sharp and merciless. "We need to check everything," I said as we pulled into my father's driveway. "The money. The accounts. All of it." He nodded and was already dialing his lawyer. We spread the papers across the kitchen table like evidence from a raid. It took minutes for the truth to surface, and only seconds for it to settle in my bones. My car, the one my father bought when Evan was born, was gone. Sold 3 weeks earlier. The bill of sale stared back at me like an insult. "They sold it," I whispered. The day after he took my keys, my father's face went still, a mask of controlled fury. Then I found the transfer. The money from the sale had been used to pay off a credit card that wasn't even in Mark's name. It was Marilyn's. "They took my car to pay her debt," I said, the words tasting unreal. I kept digging. A loan agreement slid out from the folder. $40,000. Borrower, Lena Ashford. My signature stared back at me, close but wrong. "I didn't sign this," I said, panic rising. My father examined it once. "Forgery," he said flatly. My phone locked me out of my bank account. The automated voice confirmed it. Balance, 0. My grandmother's trust, gone. My credit, destroyed. This wasn't control anymore. It was strategy. They weren't managing me. They were bankrupting me. When Mark and Marilyn showed up hours later shouting about custody and lawyers, I didn't shake. I opened the door calmly and handed Mark an envelope. He skimmed the contents, his face draining of color with every page. "You stole tens of thousands of dollars," I said. "You forged my name. You sold my property." Marilyn tried to speak. I didn't let her. "You have until morning to return every cent," I said. "Or this goes to the district attorney." They left without another word, exposed and scrambling. 3 months later, I locked the door of my own apartment. It was small, quiet. Mine, my bank balance was modest. My future uncertain. Mark was facing charges. And for the first time in a year, I slept without listening for footsteps. I wasn't grateful for the cage anymore. I was free of it. Freedom didn't arrive with fireworks or relief the way movies promise. It arrived quietly, like a muscle unclenching after being tight for too long, leaving behind soreness and disbelief. The first weeks in my apartment felt unreal. Every sound made me pause. Every knock on the door sent my pulse racing. I slept lightly, waking at the smallest noise, my body still convinced I was being watched. Evan adapted faster than I did. Children always do. He learned the layout of the tiny living room in a day, dragging his toys from corner to corner like he was mapping safe territory. Watching him laugh in a space no one controlled felt like a victory I didn't know how to celebrate yet. I was free, but freedom came with paperwork, court dates, and the slow unraveling of lies that had been wrapped around my life so tightly I'd mistaken them for structure. The legal process was brutal in its own quiet way. Statements, depositions, financial audits that laid my humiliation bare in black ink. Seeing my name attached to debts I didn't choose felt like being violated all over again. Mark's lawyer tried to paint me as emotional, unstable, overwhelmed by motherhood. Marilyn cried on cue, framing herself as a concerned elder. I learned quickly that truth doesn't speak for itself. You have to hand it a microphone and make it loud. I stayed calm. I answered questions directly. I let the documents do the shouting for me. The forged signature, the bank transfers, the sale of my car without consent. The pattern was impossible to ignore once it was laid out cleanly. The judge didn't look at me like a victim. She looked at me like a witness who had finally been heard. That shift alone felt like oxygen returning to my lungs. Outside the courtroom, rebuilding was slower and lonelier. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months didn't know what to say. Some disappeared entirely. Others showed up awkwardly, offering help I didn't know how to accept yet. I took a job that didn't match my degree but paid consistently. I learned how to budget again, how to check my own accounts, how to trust my instincts without asking permission. Every small decision felt enormous: what to buy, where to go, who to call. Autonomy is heavy when you haven't carried it in a while. At night, when Evan slept, I replayed moments from the past year and saw them clearly for the first time. The warning signs, the excuses I made, the silence I mistook for peace. I didn't blame myself anymore, but I let myself grieve the woman I was before I learned how quietly harm can speak. Mark tried to reach out once. A message slipped through before I changed my number again. It wasn't an apology. It was confusion, anger, a disbelief that I had disrupted the order he'd built. Reading it, I realized something important. People who benefit from your silence will always call your voice betrayal. I deleted the message and felt nothing afterward. No guilt, no fear, no urge to explain. That was when I knew the power had shifted permanently. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was choosing. And choice, I learned, is the most dangerous thing you can take back from someone who never wanted you to have it. Healing didn't happen all at once. It happened in fragments, moments so small they almost escaped notice. The first time I laughed without checking who might hear. The first morning I woke up and didn't feel dread before my feet touched the floor. The first time Evan ran ahead of me in a park and I didn't instinctively scan for permission to exist there. I learned that trauma doesn't vanish when danger leaves. It lingers in the body, in the reflexes, in the way silence can feel louder than shouting. But slowly the fear lost its authority. My apartment began to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. I hung photos on the walls. I planted herbs on the windowsill. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Each ordinary choice was an act of rebellion against the life I had escaped. The court case ended without drama, but with weight. Mark accepted a plea that acknowledged the fraud, the financial abuse, the coercion. Marilyn faded from the picture the moment consequences arrived. There were no cinematic apologies, no confessions that made everything neat. There was accountability, paperwork, and distance, and that was enough. Custody was formalized. My credit would take years to rebuild. Some losses couldn't be reversed. But when the judge spoke my name and affirmed my right to live without control or fear, something inside me finally settled. I walked out of that building holding Evan's hand, sunlight warming my face, and understood that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply the absence of oppression. I began telling my story carefully, at first to a therapist, then to a support group, then to women who recognized pieces of themselves in my words. I learned how common my story was, how many people thought abuse had to look violent to be real. I stopped hiding the truth because I realized silence had never protected me. It had only protected them. I'm not ashamed of what happened to me. I am proud of the woman who noticed the water was boiling and found a way out without losing her child. Strength didn't look like fighting back in the moment. It looked like patience, evidence, and timing. It looked like survival with intention. Today, my life is quieter, smaller, stronger. I don't measure success by comfort anymore. I measure it by freedom. I still have scars, but they no longer define me. I am Lena Ashford, and this is not a story about being broken. It is a story about recognizing a cage, unlocking it from the inside, and walking out without asking permission. If you're reading this and something feels familiar, if your world is shrinking one helpful decision at a time, trust that feeling. You are not imagining it. And you are not alone. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know. And if you want to hear more real stories about survival, truth, and reclaiming control, don't forget to subscribe.